Hey everyone, and welcome back to the video. This week we venture to one of Somerset's most ancient and impressive cultural heritage sites. This wonderful location occupies a unique status amongst British medieval monasteries. Nowhere else can you find so many of the original monastic buildings relatively unaltered and complete. These ruins are steeped in a rich, fascinating history going back nearly 1,000 years. Situated in the east of Exmoor, just outside of the village of Washford, it's a must-see for this beautiful, quiet part of the world. So join us as we explore Cleeve Abbey. When first exploring the site, unlike many other English heritage sites, you are normally met with a ticket office and a shop before being able to enter inside, except Cleeve has a slightly different layout. We walk inside and underneath the gatehouse court and into the medieval abbey precinct. This gatehouse is one of the most complete in the country, being built in the 13th century and remodelled twice. The gatehouse would have once contained a chapel and a guest house for the poor. This was originally divided up into smaller enclosures by a mixture of high walls, ditches and moats. The river Washford is just behind us, and there is also a moat just ahead on the other side of this gatehouse. Above the entrance arch is a panel carved with the name of Abbot de Vale, and there is imagery of a crucifixion scene in the gable above. The gatehouse interior originally had two main gates in the gate passage, one for wheeled traffic and a small one just for pedestrians. Both of these gateways were always controlled by the abbey porter. Just inside one of these small rooms was a lean-to roof-type building, now demolished, but it was thought that this served as the almonry, where charity such as clothing, food and money would be distributed out. Although we aren't able to go up inside the gatehouse, in the 14th century many of the openings were blocked to try and stabilise the building, and it's thought that in the 16th century the last abbot William de Vale rebuilt the upper floor and added buttresses to try and remedy and fix the problem. This was actually unsuccessful, and an additional modern buttress was added. The upper floor still has a fireplace and would have served as the abbey's secular courthouse, where cases involving the estate were heard. Established in the year of 1198, Cleeve Abbey was a Cistercian monastery for 339 years. The Cistercian order was one of the most successful monastic reform movements of the Middle Ages. It was founded by William, the Earl of Rumar, sometime between 1186 and 1191, as a daughter house of Revesby in Lincolnshire. Formal colonisation did not take place until 1198, by which time wooden buildings would have been erected. Building work in stone would have probably started soon after, but took up a century to complete. The original name of the abbey was Vallis Florida, which translated to the Valley of the Flowers, but it later became known as Cleeve Abbey, after the nearby village of that name. Cleeve was not terribly prosperous as a house. It never reached the heights of other Cistercian houses, like that of Glastonbury. Even at its height, it never had more than 28 monks in residence. The next set of rooms that we walk around are the Corrodians' rooms. These two rooms were remodelled in the 15th century and divided into two sets of rooms that provided high quality living quarters. You can just see from the interior that these rooms were more looked after and had everything one could need in four walls. The first room of these two has a fireplace set into the south wall between two tall rectangular shuttered windows, which also have window seats. On the left of there is a doorway to the bedroom which has a similar window and a barrel vaulted latrine, flushed by an external drain. Like many other small monasteries who needed to fund a little more cash, Cleeve Abbey was home to a number of Corrodians, what would be known as a type of pensioner in our day. They were former servants of the abbey, who were rewarded for their services with accommodation and food. The abbey also gave lodging to lay people who paid a lump sum in return for fuel, food and other necessities, including lodging during their final years of their expected lives. 4 pensioners have been identified at Cleeve in the early 16th century. The first 2 were named Stephen and Margaret Jobsons, who had worked in the abbey and done a fantastic job throughout their lives. They were given lodgings in a great chamber beyond the gate and were provided by the abbey with rent, fuel, bread, ale and candles. John Michel was a singer in the abbey church and he was given a daily allowance of bread, fish, meat, ale and fuel, as well as a pension of 53 shillings and a chamber to live in. The 4th pensioner was Edward Walker, described as a gentleman who paid an annual fee of £27 in return for a chamber underneath the east part of the refectory house, along with a door with access to the cloister and an inner chamber for his servant. The fee that Edward paid included sufficient meat and drink at the abbot's table, and an allowance for wood for his fire and stabling for his 2 horses. After the suppression, these rooms were converted into stables, and that's why the cobbled floor was laid down. In the 15th century, the abbey was remodelled to be able to adapt to changing needs. Much of the range of a first refectory was demolished and a new building constructed, set parallel to the south cloister alley. The first refectory was revealed by excavations, and incredibly it retains the 13th century tiled pavement that is still very much largely intact. The tiles themselves are extremely important because they remain in their original positions. They also display through their heraldic designs the royal patronage that the abbey enjoyed in the 13th century. In 2016, this timber shelter was built over the tiled pavement to protect it from the elements and of course ensure its future survival. The tiles are set into large square panels, which are framed by border tiles on a diamond-like pattern. Many of the tiles are heraldic design, representing the royal family, including Henry III. His brother Richard of Cornwall is represented by a double-headed eagle, which was associated with his title of King of the Romans. His son Edmund of Cornwall is also represented through the arms of Clare, which have chevrons inside a shield to commemorate the marriage in 1272 of Margaret de Clare and Edmund of Cornwall. These tiles are larger and much more prominent than the others. Similar tiles have been found at the other religious institutes like Hales Abbey, Glastonbury Abbey and Wells Cathedral. The craftsmen who made these tiles have become known as the Wessex Group. They created the designs by inlaying white clay into the red tiles and by using wooden stamps to create the outlines. It really is so interesting to look at and something that you're really not able to see up close nowadays. This interesting room has a purpose. The monastic year is split into two parts because of the relatively short period of daylight during the winter months, when the monks would follow a less demanding routine. A fire would be lit in the warming room on the 1st of November for All Saints' Day, and was kept burning day and night right up until Good Friday, so that the monks would be able to come in from the cloister and warm themselves. Throughout winter, this warming room was also a place for the monks to grease their boots, and it was also a room where they would illuminate and write manuscripts. We entered into the slype, which is a covered passageway and a corridor, but it runs through the range from the main cloister and along the walls. You'll find 6 cupboards or lockers, possibly to leave the monks' books in before heading into the entrance of the warming room. Heading up these beautifully weathered stairs, you can see a type of lobby with a bench on the left-hand side of the wall, and light would be provided by the massive window with a tiled windowsill. The plaster above the bench has several bits of graffiti on, including a drawing of a child's hand and some medieval lettering, possibly scratched into the wall by those who might have been bored of waiting. But the incredible size of the refectory is just so impressive. I mean, it had to be because it was the main communal dining hall where the monks would sit and eat their meals. The floor is made of mortar and laid over heavy boards. At the far end it is raised slightly higher to former days, and it was here that the abbot and his important guests and senior monks would sit. The ordinary monks sat at the tables ranged alongside the walls and in complete silence. It was the only way that they would be able to enjoy their meals. On the right-hand wall, towards the far end, is a doorway that gave access to a pulpit, from which one of the monks would read aloud from scripture. The pulpit has since been destroyed, but its position is marked by a later fireplace just to the right of the doorway. The glory and awe-inspiring moments in this room are of course the magnificent carved roof. It is divided alternatively by principal wooden frames into 10 bays. Each of the trusses are supported by a corbel, decorated with an angel holding a shield. It's so interesting to be able to see rooms like these in their original state, and it's places like here at Cleeve where you can really transport yourself back in time to imagine just how it would have looked. From the beautiful refectory we get to walk to the timber gallery before entering into the abbot's private quarters. But as you pass through the gallery, the first room that you notice is what's known as the painted chamber. It's thought that this location of this room and its decoration inside served as an office or as a counting house, or the room of the abbot's secretary. The present doorway was converted from a hatch set into the north wall. The painted chamber derives its name from the large, incredible 15th century wall painting on its left-hand wall. It shows an illustration of a popular religious tale in the medieval book called the Gesta Romanarium, the deeds of the Romans. From here, most of the abbot's buildings and lodgings have largely been destroyed, as it was converted into a farmhouse in the 17th century, and then rebuilt. It later turned into a series of cottages that were still occupied in the 20th century. All of these rooms are equipped with small fireplaces, possibly dating from that time that the farmhouse was built. The west range once extended northwards to the church, and inside of this room is an important and quite impressive feature, and it's that of the fireplace. But instead of just using concrete lintels for the cover, they installed a 13th century tomb cover, complete with its cross decorated with foliage as a lintel. It's impressive to see this used, but at the time of the suppression, grave robbery would have been very common, so it is no surprise that they would have used a tomb cover reused in such a way. Still part of the later farmhouse, you'll be able to climb a set of spiral stairs that take you to the upper chamber. This second room is above the painted chamber and the lobby, It is quite possible that this room might have been the private apartment of the abbot or the senior monk. Access into this room would have originally been used by the spiral staircase that was entered from outside in the cloister, which at the beginning of this video, when we first arrived into the cloister, we could see the amazing outline of the staircase. Inside this room again, there are faint traces of a wall painting just to the right hand side of the fireplace. Above the fireplace and on parts of the opposite wall is a series of radiating red lines, and the presence of wall paintings inside such a room would suggest that this room was that of an important person. After the suppression, the room was divided into two, and a plaster ceiling was inserted. This has since been removed to reveal the roof that is similar to, but much simpler than the one in the refectory, which meant that these rooms can be dated to around the same period. Immediately to the south of the chapter house is the doorway that is open to the day stairs, which the monks would use for access to the dormitory for short rests following their main meal at noon. The day stairs were originally at the east end of the southern range, but when this was remodelled later in the 15th century, they were moved to their present position. Known as one of the finest examples to have survived in their complete and original state, this monastic dormitory is incredible to be able to wander around. The only part of this dormitory that is not original and was rebuilt is the roof. It dates back to the 17th and 18th century, but it has been carved as a typical example of how a roof would look in that period. The monks would have slept on mattresses, and at the end of their mattresses would be a timber locker or chest, which they would have had their clothing inside. The size of the room would suggest that it was built to house up to 36 monks, and later in the 15th century it was subdivided by timber partitions to give the monks individual type cells and more privacy. You can see the personality that went into each of the rooms just by the window seats. They seem to have been stamped with tiles and decorated, perhaps with how the paying monk would have liked his room to have looked. The room is lit by lancet windows, which were closed by wooden shutters, some of which were later replaced with glass. At the north end is now a closed and locked doorway to the night stairs, which connected the dormitory with the church, and also a second doorway in the north-east corner, which allowed the access to the space above the south transept chapel vaults. At the end of the room there are still some faint traces of limewash with a red masonry pattern. It's thought that the whole room might have been decorated like this, but it would have been far more brighter than it is today. Interestingly, the windowsills have been turned into window seats, and you can again see the tiles when you look at them. In the east wall on the right hand side there are two later fireplaces. In several places, lost areas of medieval walling have been patched up, where holes were knocked through, possibly to allow the building to be used as a hayloft when the abbey was a farm. Right at the far end of this room, at the south of the east wall, is a doorway to the latrine. There was an unusual design feat in a swinging door, which allowed the monks to go in one side and come out on the other. There is also a gap in the wall with an iron ring slot, which would have once held a lantern to light the way to the latrine. You can see the excavations of the latrines outside the window, and can just make out the drainage system that they interestingly made. Here the monks met daily in the all-important chapter house, mostly to discuss routine business, confess any faults and receive punishments. The abbot would sit in the centre of the east wall directly opposite of the door, whilst the rest of his monks would sit on either side of benches along the walls. There would be a daily reading from the chapter of the Rule of St. Benedict. Right up until the 14th century, it was Cistercian custom to bury the abbots in the chapter house, and the tile pavement would have been set with their grave slabs, though these have since been removed. Inside of the chapter house, the abbot would decide on different punishments for the monks who had broken the rules. Punishments would include being put on a diet of just bread and water, being flogged or beaten with a whip or a stick, or in some cases the abbot would make the monk lay in the centre of the doorway of the chapter house and be stepped on over by everybody. Much before the invention of printing, books were painstakingly copied by hand, and monastic libraries formed sources of learning. Although the abbey library contained many books on secular subjects, such as agriculture and cooking, the majority of these books would have more than likely been spiritual texts. On the east wall, the library had a single lancet window, which was once fitted with iron bars and closed with a wooden shutter. The books used for study by the monks were more than likely kept in presses or on shelves around on the side walls, and would have also been under lock and key because they were so valuable. The beautiful cloister was the area where the monks would spend most of their time, when they weren't attending services in the church. It's a square court that is enclosed by large ranges of buildings. The west alley of the cloister was rebuilt in the late 15th century, and it's now part of the farmhouse. And in the southern room of the western wall it contains two fireplaces, one with a bread oven and the other with a large timber lintel. At the end of the room is a partition wall, which was built of timber studding and straw. It has actually been partially exposed to be able to showcase how it's been constructed. It's a really interesting feature here. To the left of the door is a small timber door frame, exposed and showing you how the incredible carvings in the archhead were done. The west alley was replaced by a two-storey structure, which had glazed tracery windows for the abbot to be able to gaze out of. The upper floor would have more than likely been used as the abbot's long gallery, allowing him to walk directly from his accommodation into the church right away from the elements. Of course, the church was the centre of abbey life. The one here at Cleeve was quite small in comparison to the other Cistercian churches, and is very much ruined, with only parts of the south aisle and the south transept still remaining. The foundations of the church lie in front of us. They were uncovered and unearthed in 1875. The foundations that you're able to see are the monk choir stalls that are visible in the east bay of the nave and in the crossing, which once had a tower above it. Here in the church, the monks would celebrate the Divine Office, which was a series of 8 services held during the night and day. It seemed that the whole of the church was tiled in the late 13th century. Considering Cleeve Abbey is classed as a ruin, we were very impressed with the fact that so much still stands, in original condition with original features, but also the site is just really well looked after too. It's such a great insight into how the monks lived and went about their day to day, as well as the area itself, in the beautiful rural county of Somerset. So we really hope you've enjoyed our video today. If you have, please hit that like button, consider subscribing to the channel and pop the notification bell on so you never miss a video. If you enjoy our content, why not consider supporting us over on our Patreon or joining us here on YouTube as channel members. We want to say a big thank you to everyone for watching and supporting us. So we'll see you on the next one. Till next time.